Wow, 2025 is already over, huh? And what a year it was. In gaming especially, there were lots of exciting new releases this year, and even a major new console release. But which were the best? Or at the very least, which were my favorites? Well, that's why we're here today. For me to present to you my top 5 games of 2025. Before we get into it, let's be clear. This is my subjective list based on my personal preferences and my personal experiences. As such, only games I actually played this year can qualify for the list. In addition, the game must have been released or localized into English this year to qualify. I'm also not considering early access games. They can get consideration when they actually decide to release. Alright, with all that squared away, let's get into the list. I find RPGs interesting, in theory. Both video game RPGs and tabletop ones. I enjoy the number-based optimization puzzle that most RPG battle systems provide. I also appreciate games where the story is the focus, which again happens to be a strength of the genre. My one sticking point is that they're generally way too long. Now, Depersonalization is a game I don't have that issue with. But don't worry, it has a lot more going for it than merely being short. So let's get into that. But first, I probably should concede that it arguably shouldn't qualify for this list at all, as it technically was released in 2024. That being said, I played it in 2025 around when it got a new update, making its English translation serviceable. And I make the rules here, so you heard it first, Depersonalization is an honorary 2025 release. So, what is Depersonalization? Well, it's an RPG, but it definitely takes more inspiration from Dungeons & Dragons style tabletop RPGs than your typical video game fare. We're talking customizable character sheets, skill checks, significantly branching narrative, and loads of kleptomania. Seriously, a pretty big part of the gameplay loop here is going into a room, raiding all the chests, and putting everything in your inventory. It's honestly a little unsettling how much you can carry. Now, obviously you don't have the same level of freedom of choice as you would in a tabletop game. The narrative branching is more choose your own adventure style. But otherwise, the skill check heavy gameplay and varied skills to use in combat, depending on your character's strengths, weaknesses, and available inventory items, is pretty faithful and compelling. There's even some clever mechanics that assist with role-playing. Some decisions will give you a boon or penalty depending on if you're acting in accordance with your character's personality traits or against them. For example, a hedonist will be rewarded for letting a strange tentacle have their way with them, while a cautious character will be penalized for calling out an ill-tempered coworker for slacking off on the job. Additionally, your character's skills will greatly affect what approach you take through a mission. A perceptive character may notice a lot of clues and unravel a mystery that way. A sneaky character can try pickpocketing for extra leads or resources. An eloquent character can charm people imitating them. An industrious character can MacGyver all the tools they'll need to succeed. Or if you're rich, you can just buy equipment and bribe would-be enemies. Though I will lodge a slight complaint against the skills check system because it's arguably too forgiving. This is because you can spend some luck to reroll skill checks. Not a problem in and of itself, but you can do this as many times as your luck balance will allow, and luck is plentiful enough that you should have enough to basically never fail a skill check that you have an above average aptitude for. But then again, if this system wasn't in place, people would probably just save scum to get a favorable dice roll anyway, so I'm not exactly sure how I would have changed the system. I suppose you could just do a self-imposed challenge to either never reroll a skill check or only do it once or something, but that's a bit of an inelegant solution. One system I definitely wouldn't have changed though is the anthology-style modular mission system. So the way this game works is instead of being one long main storyline, there are instead several different shorter stories that only take a few hours each. Not that I dislike longer RPG stories, as you'll soon find out, but I do like this cadence. I can sit down for a couple hours and experience a full, satisfying narrative. It also allows you to really dive into the character customization by trying out a different character when you jump into a new vignette. It also enhances the replay proposition. Like, yeah, in theory you could replay your typical RPG with a different build to see what the experience is like, but the prospect of investing 50 plus hours into a game I've already played makes that option a little dubious in my mind. But sure, I'll play a couple hours to see how different the scenario becomes when playing as an infamous retired boxer with a big ego, as opposed to the absurdist detective in crippling debt from my first playthrough. But what I especially like about this structure is what it does for the narrative branches in the game. You see, branching narratives in video games are hard. They're typically handled in one of two ways. Either as a bunch of insignificant choices that barely change anything, or as a few major choices that basically branch you into a completely different narrative. Now, to be clear, I don't begrudge developers for designing games that way. You almost have to if you don't want your scope ballooning into a near impossibility to execute on. As a very simple example, if you were to write a choose-your-own-adventure style book with a choice between 2 different story options at the end of each page, assuming there are no premature endings or reconvergences, by page 10, you would have to write 512 different page 10s. And let me remind you, a 10-page narrative is really short. Meanwhile, 512 pages can be about double the length of your average book. To counter this effect, most games with branching narratives use tricks to prune the branches so they don't get out of control like that. And Depersonalization's trick is its very structure. Since the game is organized as an anthology of shorter stories, it allows for pretty drastic divergences in the story, since the next module, the next story, isn't connected to the previous one, and therefore the branches are all pruned that way. Basically, there's a lot more freedom in how frequent and wacky your divergences can be, when you know that they're all gonna be collapsed down to a start of a new story in a couple hours anyway. So yeah, it's a pretty fun experience all around. However, I do have to bring up the game's biggest flaw, which unfortunately, especially given that it's a story-based game, is the translation. I described it as serviceable before, and that is mostly correct. But there are quite a few technical issues with the translation. There's the occasional untranslated line or name and some pretty bad dialogue box overflow. It wasn't enough to ruin my experience with the game, but it was certainly frustrating. Nevertheless, if you can look past that, which I was able to, it makes for a fun, mysterious, Lovecraftian adventure. Oh, did I not mention it's set in like the Lovecraft mythos, except all of the gods are anime girls? That may have just perked up your interest or killed it. Tell me in the comments which it was. What makes a good sequel? It's a harder question to answer than you'd think. It is a truly narrow road you must walk, with hazardous cliffs on either side. Make the sequel too similar to the original, and why should anyone bother getting the new version for more of the same? Make it too different, and the question becomes, why do you even bother making a sequel when it has almost nothing in common with the original? The narrow path in the middle involves keeping the soul, but changing the execution. And one of the best ways to do that is to find the natural evolution of the concepts of the original. And Galaxy Princess Orana does just that. Galaxy Princess Orana's predecessor, Long Live the Queen, was a strange, enjoyable manage of mechanics when it was released over a decade ago. It was basically Princess Maker, a child-raising simulator, with the added bite of numerous potential fail-states in the form of your treacherous courts, several assassination plots against you. The heightened stakes made the child-rearing all the more engaging, leading you to seriously ponder debates regarding which skills would be most beneficial to a crowned princess. Military strategy or court manners, a study of history or economics, sheer royal presence and aura, or the skill to kill a man in single combat. There are many correct answers, and many, many more wrong ones. But Long Live the Queen was certainly not a flawless game. Strategize as much as you like, but on your first run, you're probably going to end up getting assassinated by some plot that comes completely out of left field, with quite niche skills being required to evade the attempt. And after that, the game becomes less about planning and plotting and more of a Groundhog Day style time loop puzzle, where you say, okay, last time I got killed by a poison, so this time I'll study poison, or maybe self-control so I don't eat the poison snacks in the first place. That's not necessarily bad. Honestly, a lot of video games succumb to the same tendency, but it can make the game come across as not ultimately having much depth. The other arguable shortcoming of Long Live the Queen is that despite its framing, despite the fact that you're playing as a crown princess with a regent that more or less is willing to let you have your say, you're really a political object, not a true political actor. That is to say, the gameplay is all about reacting to plots and simply trying to survive until Coronation Day. You never really get a chance to devise your own strategies and machinations. You're always simply reacting to the schemes of those around you. Now again, this isn't necessarily a problem with the game, it's just a description of its chosen scope. If you want to actually be the one executing those plots and schemes, that's just not what this game is. Go play Crusader Kings instead. Or play Galaxy Princess Orana. Galaxy Princess Orana is a direct follow-up to Long Live the Queen with the same stat-raising basic gameplay, albeit with some of the fiddler math smoothed out a bit. But the big difference is this is a game about swaying electors to your camp to win an election. That's right, we've graduated from hereditary to elective monarchy. As such, instead of being on a relatively linear track where various obstacles happen to pop up and you happen to have the right skills or not to deal with them, you are flying around the galaxy voluntarily taking on various tasks and trials in your pursuit of the throne. Even the assassination attempts, which you obviously don't explicitly opt into, are nevertheless influenced by your campaign. You'll become a target by antagonizing or otherwise alienating various electors, and you can even consult with your spy master to get advanced warnings about assassination plots in the works. This, I believe, was technically the case in Long Live the Queen 2, but there the system was very opaque, and alienating a noble might have meant randomly failing an etiquette skill check earlier in the game, or just picking a different dialogue option to what that noble would have preferred. Whereas here, if you survive an assassination attempt, you'll be able to uncover exactly who tried to have you killed, and their animosity towards you will be due to active choices about you ignoring their interests, or potentially even explicit trying to publicly castigate them. So in short, some sequels are an unnecessary repetition. Some are hardly sequels at all. But Galaxy Princess Orana is, in a real sense, the sort of experience that I wish Long Live the Queen had been over a decade ago.
We're breaking through, down to the core, no stopping us, not anymore. Inside the storm, I found the key, your beat sprang out, my voice has been released, here it comes.
Nintendo's 3D platformers have long been bastions of fun movement controls, clever level design, and just straight up fun for fun's sake gameplay. But speaking as a member of the generation that grew up playing Minecraft, hasn't there always been something missing? That's right, you notice it too. The lack of ability to strip mine the entire landscape is a glaring omission. Until now in Donkey Kong Bonanza. I say that in jest, but in all seriousness, it's a different approach to a 3D platformer that was quite refreshing. It gives Donkey Kong's gameplay a real visceral, weighty nature to it that's quite satisfying to control in and of itself. The worlds are pretty creatively put together, and a delight to explore. Pauline is characterized quite well, and a welcome companion on the journey with a great performance by Jenny Kidd. I don't know, I really don't have much else to say. The game is simply fun, and ultimately, isn't that what we're here for? So, remember how I was talking about scope creep in the depersonalization segment? About how a long narrative with several meaningful branches is practically speaking infeasible to make? That's why you've got to get clever at the problem like depersonalization did. Or, and hear me out here, you could just bite the bullet and say, yeah, let's make 100 different routes, each exploring a different facet of a massive, mysterious narrative that'll literally take hundreds of hours to play through. And well, then you would have made the 100-line Last Defense Academy. So yeah, the main draw here is obviously the narrative, which is pretty good. I wouldn't classify it as a mystery per se, but there are several layers of strangeness and mystery going on here for sure. It's certainly enough to encourage quite a few replays at the very least. And speaking of which, the game has one of the more interesting diegetic explanations for replays that I've seen. Several games are made with the expectation that you'll replay them, at least in part. I mean, most death systems fundamentally result in a mini time loop until you've cleared the obstacle that killed you. But something like Super Mario Bros. Never acknowledges the failures that eventually resulted in your success. In universe, Mario canonically has like perfect, almost clairvoyant reaction times and foresights. Now, the 100 line certainly isn't the first game to have an in-universe explanation for replays, but it is in the minority there, and the way it's framed here helps create greater alignment between the player and protagonist on subsequent playthroughs. But then on top of that, the replay explanation isn't just a framing device, it actually has implications on the narrative as a whole that ripple out even beyond your protagonist. And one fascinating thing about the structure of the narrative here is how different your experience might be depending on what order you play the routes in. Now, to a degree that's the case in any branching narrative game, but it's accentuated here by the volume of major reveals that may be relevant in multiple routes, but only properly explained in one of those routes. As you uncover more about what's going on, you can develop a satisfying case of dramatic irony, until you find out that what you knew was only layer 1 of the underlying mystery. And then you got a new case of dramatic irony. Of course, the plot could be as ambitious or clever as anything, but if the characters sucked, the narrative likely wouldn't be worth experiencing. Now, the characters, they are very anime, which might be a green or red flag depending on your personal preference, but they are all certainly distinctive, and in such a sprawling narrative, they all get their moment to shine. Though in the way of critique, the different routes are quite varied, which is cool, but can result in tonal whiplash when you go from a legitimately tragic, heart-wrenching story to a strange mystery, to a rom-com, to a route that is literally called the comedy route. As an aside, worst route in the game, that one. At least that I've played so far. Yes, I haven't finished this game. It's really long. I already went over that. And speaking of which, this is of course a game, so there is gameplay, specifically in the form of a tactical RPG. The systems are deep enough to be interesting and simple enough to be approachable. Each of your units are vastly different from each other in their abilities, allowing for good variety and texture in each battle. And the fact that in battle you don't control which front each unit gets deployed to means that you're constantly forced to try different complements of units, which helps keep the gameplay fresh. So yeah, the base gameplay here is quite good. The problem is it's not deep or varied enough for a game of this length. And after about the 50-hour mark, you've seen most of what the combat has to offer mechanically, and from there it gradually becomes less of an engaging puzzle and more of just some work to do between plot beats. The central conceit of the narrative doesn't help in this regard either. Since the vast majority of battles see you defending the same location, the map variety here, which could have helped keep things fresh, is virtually non-existent. And then there is one more factor that exacerbates that lack of variety even further. And that factor is that the branches in this game are generally pretty disciplined about a given choice only changing things that it has a causal chain to be able to alter. Now, to be clear, that's generally a positive trait in a branching narrative, unless you're specifically going for something whimsical or absurdist. But in this case, it indirectly causes an issue in the gameplay variety. That's because, while having a falling out with another character might provide the interpersonal drama with an interesting new direction to take, it logically wouldn't affect the pace of your enemy's campaign against you. And therefore there's a lot of battles in different routes that are just straight up repeats of each other. The game does give you an option to skip battles that are total repeats, but that's the sort of inelegant band-aid solution that I'm honestly a bit disappointed they had to resort to in the first place. Nevertheless, the 100-line Last Defense Academy is an ambitious game that's managed to hold my interest through its very long runtime. Most great games have a couple key strengths that turn them into transcendent experiences. Maybe they have some of the most fun gameplay. Maybe they look like a work of art in motion. Maybe the story is on par with the best films or novels. Or perhaps they just synthesize one experience, one feeling so perfectly. But excellence in one regard often comes with maybe not a bad execution of another facet, but a pedestrian one. Maybe the story is bare bones. Maybe there isn't much actual gameplay to speak of. Perhaps the visuals are serviceable, but nothing impressive. And maybe in synthesizing that one experience so well, other facets of the game feel a bit underdeveloped. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is one of the rare games that somehow manages to hit a home run in almost every category you can assess a game by. And to be clear, this is not a game that's merely competent across the board. It is masterfully crafted in almost every regard. It is by far the best game I played in 2025. It may even end up being the best game I play this decade. And I must stress, it's such a complete package. The story is weighty, emotional, and beautifully executed. The gameplay is thrilling moment to moment and a delightful puzzle with regards to the overarching strategy. The visuals are surreal and beautiful. The music is legitimately one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. The world building is fascinating, the characters are compelling, the performances are on point. There is just nothing to complain about. So, let's forget review. Let me sell you this game. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a classic turn-based RPG, but it has the same twist as Paper Mario. In battle, you don't simply take turns getting punched in the face with your opponents, rather you get to dodge, parry, and counterattack in response to your enemy's attacks by executing what are effectively quick-time events. Of course, the game takes this concept and runs way further with it than a Mario RPG basically ever has. While enemies may start out the game having one big wind-up and then a strike for you to dodge. By the end, the experience looks a little more like this.
Let's dance. Ready to go.
For some reason, this enemy is just one of the ones that I have ingrained in like my soul of how to fight. But here's the thing. those reaction-based challenges aren't covering up an otherwise weak combat system. In fact, even ignoring the dodging, this is one of the more intriguing combat systems I've encountered in an RPG, thanks in large part to the hugely flexible customization of your party members. You can choose what skills they have access to, what their stats are, what special passive effects they have in battle. Just setting up your party with the ideal set of skills, effects, and stats, and trying to find the most effective synergies produces the same sort of optimization puzzle that roguelikes routinely thrive on. And when you've found a functional solution, well, satisfying might be an understatement. Alright, Mel, let's see what you got. Okay, let's start with the classic opening. Oh! Okay. All in all, this marriage of grand strategy and moment-to-moment reactions creates a combat system that doesn't get old for the whole length of the game. A game you'll want to see through to the end for its incredibly moving story, first and foremost. I won't spoil anything, but here's the premise. Lumiere is stuck under the heel of a cruel goddess. Every year, the paintress decreases the number on the monolith overlooking the city by 1. And when she does so, everyone that age dies. By the start of the game, the monolith's number has declined all the way to 33. And you are to take part in the titular Expedition 33, on a likely doomed attempt to brave the wild and dangerous continent to reach the paintress and her monolith, slay her, and put an end to the cycle of death. That's about what you learn in the prologue. As you sally forth, you grow quite attached to the characters and watch as they suffer on this doomed quest, but also learn to support one another. And ultimately you end up wrestling with how to cope with loss, the purpose of art, and a moral dilemma drawing on duty to family, creation, and the value of the world itself. What you're seeing on screen isn't this moment of the game, but it does feature at the end of it one choice that basically chooses which ending you get. Now normally I don't like this in games because it feels cheap, but here the game has weighty enough themes that it feels earned. It feels like you've gone on this deep exploration of the human condition, and now the game takes a step back and says, alright, what's your verdict? And it actually works very, very well in my opinion. Look, I know I'm far from the first person you've probably heard this from, but if you haven't experienced Expedition 33 yet, you are truly missing out. And believe me, I know how tempting it can be to play the role of contrarian and assume the thing getting all the praise is regarded too highly and will be reappraised once the people settle down. But if that is truly your inclination here, trust me when I say that this game is legitimately worth the hype. And it is truly something special. And there you go, my top 5 games of 2025. I hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, I recommend all of these games highly, but if you're still on the fence about any of them, you can check out my Let's Plays of each of them on my Let's Play channel. Additionally, if you want to see more on Expedition 33 specifically, I've got a video in the works for that right now, which should be released in 2 weeks. And if you have played any of these 5 games, please leave your own thoughts in the comments about them, or give me some recommendations on what some of the best games you played this year were. But anyway, before I go, I should thank my patrons, especially my $15 tier patrons, Alex Oxling and Ash Princess. And until next time, I've been CMeeCraft, and I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.